Well, it's afternoon on Wednesday, and I wasn't able to come to you before now, but here I am. And so we finished yesterday in the book of the prophet Jeremiah. We finished chapter 33, which was the captivity, and then dwelt more on the return, the glorious return, the gracious return that had nothing to do with the return from Babylon. It was all about the future kingdom of Christ, where the branch of David will sit on the throne, and the people will say, "The Lord is, the Lord is our righteousness," or "The Lord our righteousness." Remember old Sid Canoe, Jehovah Sid Canoe, and He's the Lord our righteousness. And we talked about the righteousness of God in the last chapter and his return to fulfill his promise to Abraham and to David. That hadn't happened yet. It's going to happen. It's going to happen pretty soon. As a matter of fact, it could happen 7 years from today if the rapture is today. Now, we're beginning chapter 34 in the book of the prophet Jeremiah. We're going to skip back in time a little bit. This previous chapter was set in the year before, between 2 years and 1 year before the fall of Jerusalem, which would have been either in 1587 or 1588. No, 587 or 588 BC, because the fall of Babylon, the fall of Jerusalem was 586 BC. So this goes back to 590, which Jerusalem wasn't encircled. As a matter of fact, some of Nebuchadnezzar's soldiers had showed up and made Zedekiah pay. Zedekiah was in the process of rebelling, but he has not quite rebelled against the king of Babylon yet. And there was still a little time left. A year from now, a year from 590 BC, the whole town of Jerusalem would be encircled by the armies of the Chaldeans, Nebuchadnezzar's forces. In chapter 34, we're going to see God give Zedekiah a break, and then because of his a combination of rebellious behavior and weak character, God removed this blessing from him. It doesn't make God a liar. It makes God just, because he made a deal and didn't go through with it. Zedekiah did. God always goes through with his deals. So anyhow, we will just kind of proceed from there. That's probably enough preamble. In verse 1 of chapter 34, the word which came unto Jeremiah from the Lord, when Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, and all his army, and all the kingdoms of the earth, and of his dominions, and all the people, fought against Jerusalem, and against all the cities thereof. You see, the cities, the cities that were in the frontier, they weren't taken yet. They weren't fallen. Nebuchadnezzar hadn't closed on Jerusalem yet. He's still trying to make a deal with Jeremiah. He's still trying to make a deal with Zedekiah, to get Zedekiah to fall into line, because Zedekiah is a puppet king to Nebuchadnezzar. So the war is going on, but Jerusalem is not encircled yet. And there are still armies in the field fighting Nebuchadnezzar's armies. This is 4 years before the fall, at least one full year before the siege of Babylon, which lasted from 589 to 586 BC. The word which came unto Jeremiah from the Lord, when Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, and all his army, and all the kingdoms of the earth of his dominion, And all the people fought against Jerusalem and against all the cities thereof, saying, Thus saith the Lord, God tells Jeremiah, the God of Israel, Go and speak to Zedekiah, king of Judah, and tell him, Thus saith the Lord, Behold, I will give this city into the hand of the king of Babylon, and he shall burn it with fire. And thou shalt not escape out of his hand, but surely shall be taken, and delivered into his hand. And thine eyes shall behold the eyes of the king of Babylon, and he shall speak with thee mouth to mouth, and thou shalt go to Babylon. Yet hear the word of the Lord, O Zedekiah, king of Judah. Thus saith the Lord of thee, Thou shalt not die by the sword, but thou shalt die in peace, and with the burnings of thy fathers, the former kings which were before thee, and so shall they burn odors for thee. And they will lament thee, saying, Ah, Lord, for I have pronounced the word of the Lord, saith the Lord. Then Jeremiah the prophet, God says, hey, you'll die in peace. I'm going to burn the city, but I'm going to let you die in peace, and everybody will throw you a great funeral and talk about a wonderful guy you was, just like they did to your fathers, all the way back to David. Then Jeremiah the prophet spake all these words unto Zedekiah, the king of Judah and Jerusalem. And when the king of Babylon's army fought against Jerusalem and against all the cities of Judah that were left, against Achish and against Azekah, for these defense cities remained of the cities of Judah. And while this was all going on, so this is the word that came unto Jeremiah from the Lord. After that, the king Zedekiah had made a covenant with all the people which were at Jerusalem to proclaim liberty unto them. What's he talking about? It's going to let the slaves go, going to let the servants go, going to let the debtors go free, going to forgive all the debts. It is like having the Jubilee. It is the 7 years of liberty that he's talking about. I need to explain what this is before we continue, so we will fall back to Exodus somewhere. Exodus 21. This is right after the giving of the 10 Commandments on Mount Sinai, and God begins to speak to Moses. I'm sorry. Pardon me. And Moses began to speak with God, and God began to speak to Moses about the judgments and the statutes. So this is in chapter 21 of Exodus, directly following the giving of the 10 Commandments on Mount Sinai. Chapter 21, Exodus, verse 1. Now these are the judgments which thou shalt set before them, God is saying to Moses. Now this is what we're talking about in relation to Zedekiah. This is some background, some foundation you need to know. There were some things that kings and people had to do, all the rich people, the princes. If thou buy an Hebrew servant, 6 years he shall serve, and in the 7th he shall go out free for nothing. Like if you buy a servant, an indentured servant, you buy a slave, which later on they weren't supposed to do. But if you could have them as a hireling, but you couldn't keep them as a slave for nothing, like you did when you captured the peoples from other countries. They could just keep them for slaves. They were captives. But that's not the way you had to treat your Hebrew brethren. And what it is somebody gets poor and he sells himself into your service. Well, after 7 years, you've got to let him go. So 6 years shall he serve you, and in the 7th he shall go out free for nothing. It means he doesn't have to pay anything. And if he came by himself, in verse 3, he shall go out by himself. But if he were married when he sold himself to you, then his wife shall go out with him. Of course, his wife was there working for you the whole time, but she gets to go too. And if his master have given him a wife, and she have borne him sons or daughters, the wife and her children shall be her master's, and he shall go out by himself, the servant, because those already belong to the master. And if the servant shall plainly say, I love my master, my wife, and my children. I will not go out free. In other words, I will not go out for nothing. Even though it's free for me to leave, I won't go out, and I won't go out and, quote, be free, because I love my wife and my children and my master. And he makes a decision to stay, the servant does. Well, then his master shall bring him unto the judges, and he shall also bring him to the door unto the doorpost, and his master shall bore his ear through with an awl, and he shall serve him forever. And put a ring, the emblem of the master's house, in his hand. A little more about this for Deuteronomy, which means the second law, or the second giving of the law. Now, just a little more details. Just a little more details. In verse 7 of chapter 15, and this is what sets up a restatement of the law of the servant. You have to let them go out free after they work for you 6 years, and the 7th year you let them go. Verse 7 of chapter 15 of Deuteronomy. If there be among you a poor man of one of thy brethren within any of thy gates in thy land, which the Lord thy God giveth thee, thou shalt not harden thine heart, nor shut thine hand from thy poor brother. For thou shalt open thine hand wide unto him, and shalt surely lend him sufficient for his need, and that which he wanteth. Oh, if it were like that today. There was a time in this country where we helped each other, and you didn't have to spend $1 billion on advertising to raise some money. People just gave. They gave out of their food. They gave out of their stock. They gave out of their clothing. They gave out of their goods to help a neighbor. We won't do that now. The devil has made it where it's so hard for each one of us to scratch by. Only a very rich person would have something to give to satisfy every need. But we can always do what we can. But thou shalt open thine hand wide unto him, and shalt surely lend him sufficient for his need, in that which he wanteth. Beware that there be not a thought in thy wicked heart, saying, now this is the hiring of a servant. You give him everything he needs, but then he's going to work for you for 6 years because you paid off all his debts. You've given him a place to live. You've given him a job to do. You're going to feed him 3 squares a day or whatever they had back in that day. And he's going to live with you, and he's going to work for you because you took him in and saw to his need and settled his accounts. Now he owes you. He says, but beware that there not be a thought in thy wicked heart, saying, the 7th year, the year of release, is at hand, and then I be evil against thy poor brother, that thou givest him not, and he cry unto the Lord against thee, and it shall be sent unto thee. Remember, it said he shall not go out empty. Whether he serves the whole 6 years or not. See, the 7th year is always established by the Sabbath of the land, which we have gone over and over more than either 2 or 3 times as we've been studying Jeremiah, because one of the reasons for Judah's captivity is they refused to give the land its Sabbaths. See, for 6 years you were supposed to plant and sow. Then in the 7th year, you don't plant and you don't sow, and you give the land rest. And at the time of Nebuchadnezzar's capture of Jerusalem and taking Judah into captivity, they haven't observed the 7th year Sabbath for 490 years. And so they owed God 70 years for the land. And that's exactly how long they were in the Babylonian captivity and did not till the land. The land had its rest. This is a concept that is just almost totally alien to us today. The land had rest. He gave it to him. God gave it to him. But anyway, if you get a servant before the year of the Sabbath, the seventh year Sabbath, and you're thinking, well, I'll just use him, I won't send him out. See, but the original command says you can't send him out for nothing. You can't send him out empty-handed if you let him go, and you're supposed to let him go. Thou shalt surely give him, and thine heart shall not be grieved when thou givest unto him, because that for this thing the Lord thy God shall bless thee in all thy works. See, God can give you more than you can ever lose on a business deal, more than you could ever give away as a gift or pay as a wage. God will bless you far beyond that if you love him and keep his commandments. For the poor shall never cease out of the land. Therefore I command thee, saying, thou shalt open thine hand wide unto thy brother, to thy poor, and to thy needy, and in thy land. Jesus said, poor you have with you all these, always. And when you're able, you can do them good. But me, you have not always. In other words, you need to concentrate on me while I'm here, he was telling his disciples. And that's a good word for today. Help the poor and the halt and the lame, but keep your eyes on Christ. Put all your energy toward worshiping Christ, and he will bless you in such a way that you'll have something to give to the poor, that you'll have money to give to the poor, that you'll have time to devote to the poor, and that you'll have adequate overflow of love in your heart to give to the poor. I know a lot of people who help the poor but don't love them. And when you work in the homeless ministry long enough, you realize that you got to love them, or you can't keep going back. Something the Lord taught me. He had to show me. Now, we get into the even more clarification of the original law. If you have a servant, he shall not go out empty. Verse 12, chapter 15 of Deuteronomy. And if thy brother, an Hebrew man or a Hebrew woman, be sold unto thee and serve thee 6 years, then the seventh year thou shalt let him go free from thee. And when thou sendest him out free from thee, thou shalt not let him go away empty. It's a bonus. It's time to get your what do they call it? Not your retirement package, but your golden parachute, or your severance pay. Your severance pay. It shows you how long it's been since I've had a real job. And if thy brother, an Hebrew man or an Hebrew woman, be sold unto thee and serve thee 6 years, then in the seventh year thou shalt let him go free from thee. And when thou sendest him out free from thee, thou shalt not let him go away empty. And when thou sendest him out free from thee, thou shalt not let him go away empty. Thou shalt furnish him liberally out of thy flock, out of thy floor, out of thy winepress, of that wherewith the Lord thy God hath blessed thee. In other words, however God's blessed you, you need to bless the servant that you're letting go free. And thou shalt remember that thou wast a bondman in the land of Egypt, and the Lord thy God redeemed thee. Therefore, I command this thing today, and it shall be, if he say unto thee, I will not go away from thee, because he loveth thee in thine house, because he is well with thee, then thou shalt take an awl and thrust it through his ear into the door, and he shall be thy servant forever. And also unto thy maidservant thou shalt do likewise. If it shall not seem hard unto thee when thou sendest him away from thee free, for he hath been worth a double hired servant to thee in serving thee 6 years, and the Lord shall bless thee in all thou doest. Well, look what happens here. I don't know how much time we got left. Well, we got time to introduce the subject and get into it. Oh, I'm sorry. I was looking at the wrong spot. Back to Jeremiah 34. Verse 8, now this is the word that came unto Jeremiah from the Lord after that the king Zedekiah had made a covenant with all the people which were at Jerusalem to proclaim liberty to them. That is the liberty he was proclaiming. they sacrificed a cow, a calf, a heifer. They sacrificed a beast, and then they divided it, and they walked through the parts like you do with a covenant. They weren't really making a covenant with God. They made a covenant with each other. The king came up with this idea, and he got all the lords and the princes and the rich people and the priests and the temple people and all of the higher ups. He got them to agree to this. What Zedekiah did, that every man should let his manservant and every man his maidservant, being a Hebrew or a Hebrewess, to go free, that none should serve himself of them, to wit, of a Jew his brother. Zedekiah did this. And God took notice. That is why, after Zedekiah did this, that he told Jeremiah that Zedekiah will die peacefully, and he'll be mourned like his fathers, and be buried with his fathers, and have a good funeral, have nice words spoken of him. But we're going to see the wrinkle. God did all this for Zedekiah because he had decided to obey the law of Moses, which was the word of God. Now, when all the princes and all the people which had entered into the covenant heard that everyone should let his maidservant and manservant go free, that none of them should serve themselves of them any more, then they obeyed and let them go. And so God is good to Zedekiah, who had been so disobedient. He says, I'll let you die in peace. I'll bury you here with your people. But afterward, verse 11, after all the higher ups let their servants go, their slaves, their indentured servants, but afterward they turned and caused the servants and the handmaids, whom they had let go free, to return, and brought them into subjection for servants and for handmaids. Therefore, the word of the Lord came to Jeremiah from the Lord. I might as well say it came back again. Scratch what I told you the first time. Therefore, verse 12, the word of the Lord came to Jeremiah from the Lord, saying, Thus saith the Lord, the God of Israel. I made a covenant with your fathers in the day that I brought them forth out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage, saying, At the end of 7 years, let ye go, every man his brother in Hebrew, which hath been sold unto thee. And when he has served 6 years, thou shalt let him go free from thee. But your fathers hearkened not unto me, neither inclined their ear. And now you returned, and had done the right thing in my sight, God says to wicked Zedekiah. You did the right thing in proclaiming liberty, every man to his neighbor. And ye had made a covenant before me in the house which is called by my name. But, seems like there's always a but. But, verse 16, you turned and polluted my name. He caused every man his servant and every man his handmaid, whom ye had set at liberty at their pleasure, to return, and brought them into subjection, to be unto you for maids, for servants, and for handmaids. Therefore, ye have not hearkened unto me. In proclaiming liberty, every one to his brother, and every man to his neighbor, behold, I proclaim a liberty for you, saith the Lord. I'm going to give you liberty to the sword, to the pestilence, and to the famine, and I will make you to be removed into all the kingdoms of the earth. We'll pick this up again tomorrow because I want to read to you what will happen 3+ years from the time that we're reading. We're in 590 BC, and I'm going to read you what will happen in 596, just so there's no doubt. Remember, Zedekiah made a covenant with all the people to proclaim liberty to the servants, following the law of Moses, to let them go free. I don't know what he thought. Might gain him some good graces of God. And it did, because God came to Jeremiah and told him to tell him that, hey, you're going to get to die in peace right here in Jerusalem. I'm going to destroy the city, but I'm going to wait till you're gone. You get to die in peace, and they'll have a great funeral for you. They'll have burnings and mournings for you. They'll weep for you, and you'll lay down and you'll be buried with your fathers. This was about as good an ending as Zedekiah could hope for. But then, even though they made a covenant, Zedekiah and all the rich people and the higher-ups, the priests, the princes, the temple rulers, the Levites, they all turned against God and made their servants come back to be slaves. So God says, okay, I'm going to destroy you and carry you away. I'll give you the liberty of slavery. I'll give you the liberty of captivity. I'll give you the liberty of not owning property. I'll give you the liberty of seeing your sons and daughters die. I'll give you that kind of liberty. Chapter 25. Chapter 25 of 2 Kings. And it came to pass in the 9th year of his reign, and in the 10th month, and in the 10th day of the month, that Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came, he and all his host, against Jerusalem, and pitched against it. This would happen the next year. And they built forts against it round about. That means the defense cities had fallen on the frontier. And the city was besieged until the 11th year of King Zedekiah. And on the 9th day of the 4th month, the famine prevailed in the city, and there was no bread for the people of the land. The city was broken up, and all the men of war fled by night by the way of the gate between the two walls, which is by the king's garden. Now the Chaldees were against the city round about, and the king went the way toward the plain. And the army of the Chaldees pursued after the king, and overtook him in the plains of Jericho, and all his army were scattered from it. So they took the king and brought him up to the king of Babylon to Riblah, and they gave judgment upon him. He didn't die a king's death. He wasn't mourned. He wasn't buried with his fathers. God changed his mind when Zedekiah didn't follow through. Sometimes we swear to God we're going to obey his laws and his commandments, and that we're going to love Jesus, and then we just don't follow through. And they slew the sons of Zedekiah before his eyes, and then put out the eyes of Zedekiah. That doesn't sound like dying in peace. And bound him with fetters of brass and carried him to Babylon. Doesn't sound like he died in peace. God took back the blessing and gave the cursing that was promised in Leviticus, promised in Deuteronomy, promised in the law. that there would be blessings for obedience and cursings for rebellion. And in the 5th month, on the 17th day of the month, which is the 19th year of King Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came Nebuzaradan, captain of the guard, a servant of the king of Babylon, unto Jerusalem. And he burnt the house of the Lord, and the king's house, and all the houses of Jerusalem, and every great man's house burned he with fire. And all the army of the Chaldees, which were with the captain of the guard, broke down the walls of Jerusalem round about. Now the rest of the people that were left in the city, and the fugitives that fell away to the king of Babylon, with the remnant of the multitude, did Nebuzaradan, the king, the captain of the guard, carried away. But the captain of the guard left to the poor of the land to be vine dressers and husbandmen. And the pillars of brass that were in the house of the Lord, and the bases and the brazen sea that was in the house of the Lord, did the Chaldees break in pieces, and carried the brass of them to Babylon. And the pots and the shovels and the snuffers and the spoons and all the vessels of brass wherever they were ministered, they took away. And the fire pans and the bowls and such things that were of gold, and of silver, the captain of the guard took away. The 2 pillars, one sea, and the bases which Solomon had made for the house of the Lord. The brass of all these vessels was without weight. And the height of one pillar was 18 cubits. The chapiter upon it was brass. And the height of the chapiter 3 cubits. And the wreathen work and the pomegranates upon the chapiter round about, and all of brass. And like unto these have the 2nd pillar with the wreathen work. And the captain of the guard took Sarai and Zephaniah, the 2nd priest, the keepers of the door. And out of the city he took an officer that was set over the men, and 5 men of them that were in the king's presence, which were found in the city, and the principal scribe of the host, which mustered the people of the land, and 60 of the people of the land that were found in the city. And Nebuzaradan, the captain of the guard, took these and brought them to the king of Babylon to Riblah. And the king of Babylon smote them and slew them at Riblah with the hand of Haman. So Judah was carried out of the land. Zedekiah did a good thing. God says, okay, I'll let you die in peace. Then Zedekiah and all the rich people turned around and went back on their word, and brought into subjection all of those to whom they had given liberty, all the servants and slaves. And the Lord says, okay, well, if that's how it's going to be, then you can forget what I said earlier. You'll die in Babylon. After you've watched all your sons die, you'll die in Babylon.